It's great to welcome back to the program attorney Mark Bankston, partner at Farrar and Ball, may be best known to our audience for his takedown of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, and we will come back to that. Mark, I want to talk a little bit about Mauricio Garcia.
Sure.
Mauricio Garcia, Texas man, filed a libel lawsuit after being falsely identified as a neo-Nazi mass shooter by several media outlets and some far-right personalities. This was a primarily a mistaken identity situation. Tell us kind of how it all came to be.
Sure. What some of y'all may remember that a couple summers ago in Allen, Texas, there was a neo-Nazi mass shooting at an outlet mall where many people, including children, were killed. In the immediate aftermath of that, the shooter was identified by name, Mauricio Garcia, and some people online tried to figure out who this person was, and they found the wrong person, a resident of Dallas named Mauricio Garcia, and started spreading his picture all over the world as though he was a neo-Nazi mass murderer. And as a result, all of his friends and family had thought he was a mass murderer. His mom was getting calls from people saying, "I'm so sorry your son is a neo-Nazi." And you're right, it was a case of mistaken identity, but it was a little more complicated than that because the Mauricio Garcia they found was someone they thought that they could use to deny the narrative that it was a neo-Nazi mass shooter. Because anybody can take one look at my client and they know that he is not the kind of Hispanic who would be a mass shooter. He is very much a Dallas area lowrider Chicano who has no Anglo self-identity whatsoever. And so they wanted to use this to deny the media story that there was a neo-Nazi mass shooter.
Can you talk about the outlets that ran with the photo and then how the reporting followed from that?
Sure, sure. A lot of it really kind of began on the gutters of the internet, the traditional areas that we see this misinformation come from, which is these sort of anonymous Twitter accounts on far right Twitter. That spread into the next level of the media ecosystem, which is these right-wing independent outlets that mainly do internet reporting. And these are people like Tim Pool's media business, Owen Schroyer at InfoWars, and Steven Crowder. All were in on this sort of thing. After that happened, it started to spread into even the more mainstream outlets. And when I say mainstream, I use that a little bit tongue in cheek because the next place it went was Newsmax. And so that's just one rung up this right-wing fake news machine. What was actually surprising is to see that after it went to those places, it was also used by Televisia Univision, who has traditionally been known for being a very responsible media outlet. You know, Jorge Ramos is their lead anchor, maybe the most trusted media figure in the world. But a lot of people don't know that in 2022, they merged with Televisia and their entire news department was replaced with some people who are perhaps more friendly to this right-wing ecosystem that is producing this fake news.
So give us a sense of the law in terms of what do you have to prove? I believe Texas law gives media outlets a chance to correct mistakes. Is that what the law says, and was that done?
In Texas, you have to ask the media outlets to correct. And if they do, that plaintiff is not allowed to pursue punitive damages, which are damages additional on top of his injury to punish that defendant. And so in this particular case, it was interesting because Newsmax's report got so much negative press that they corrected very quickly. They were under intense public pressure to do so. Now, there were other media outlets, for instance, Crowder, Schroyer, Tim Pool, who were served requests for corrections and they did not correct. So you sort of have a mixed bag. Is that you have Newsmax is the only one who has ever publicly acknowledged the mistake that they made. And the rest of these defendants basically just ignored my client and found themselves in the lawsuit.
Have any of the other defendants put forward an explanation or excuse? I don't want to use loaded language. I mean, a defense, an explanation, an excuse, whatever you would want to call it.
None that the trial court found acceptable. All of the defendants moved to dismiss the case, citing their various defenses. And at that point in Texas, we have what's called anti-SLAPP, which means the plaintiff pretty much has to prove every element of their case right off the bat. And the court determines if there's clear and specific evidence for the plaintiff's claims or if there are any valid defenses. In this case, there were no valid defenses found by the trial court. And so all of the defendants who sought to get out of the case were unable to do so. Mostly their defenses revolve around the idea that, oh, we mistakes got made. What can you do? And that's just not a valid defense for defamation. If you don't act as a reasonably ordinary, prudent publisher, then you can be held liable for defamation. They try to make other arguments too, to try to mitigate the amount of harm that they think they did. They typically point fingers at each other. But here you really do have that classic situation that we're seeing over and over, where a group, an ecosystem of far right-wing accounts and media outlets collectively get a story out into the public consciousness.
You mentioned that in the immediate aftermath, people close to your client said, I guess this guy's a neo-Nazi, right? And of course, at some point, I assume relatively quickly, that misapprehension was corrected. But can you talk about what are the damages that were maybe more sustained here to your client?
Well, what you have to understand, of course, is that while certainly the him and his family had received some calls from, people he had gone to high school with, former coworkers, things like that, those misapprehensions were able to be quickly corrected. But you have to consider all of the people in his life who did not call, who may never call the family again, thinking that he's a neo-Nazi mass murderer. So you have this one set, which is all the people who knew him in his life, who may have encountered these broadcasts. But then you have a second set of, think about the emotional impact it has on you when you know that millions of people across the country are looking at you as a monster, as a neo-Nazi child murderer. For somebody like my client Mauricio, who's not really exposed to a lot of attention in his life, that can really mess up your mind. That is a really hard thing to deal with. So not only do you have the reputational damage that's occurred to him through people he know or people he may encounter in the future, right? But it's also the emotional damage that happened to him of feeling powerless to stop this. And during this entire time, really, his life did get turned upside down. He was not well equipped to deal with this at all.
Let me play devil's advocate here. There are some who would say, listen, I'm sensitive to what Mark is saying, and it seems that there was an immediate negative impact. But at this point in time, at a national level, people have moved on from the story, and nobody in a literal sense thinks that your client was the shooter. This is the argument, right? Further, this has the potential to have a really chilling effect on independent creators who are inevitably going to make some mistakes in pursuing stories more quickly, maybe, than corporate media might have the ability to do so. Isn't this really a suppression of an environment of independent media that we should actually generally be supportive of? What would you say to such an argument?
So two is I would address both of those points, which is first, there's the famous phrase that a lie gets around the world before the truth puts its pants on.
Yeah.
And that's very true when it comes to issues like this. Obviously, I've handled a lot of these kinds of cases involving these sort of fake identifications, stories that turn out not to be true. And what I find over and over is, though, that in certain circles, these facts are corrected. There's a certain media watchdog sort of community that understands that these stories were wrong. For the vast majority of people, that image of my client is the image of the shooter in their
Mm.
minds, all these people who are exposed to that. And what's wild is that you still see it referenced online to this day. For a lot of us, we think, oh, these stories go away. But when you look at all of these strange little conspiracy theories or these strange little misidentifications, they stay persistent, and you still see it on Twitter to this day. You see references to my client. Um, Not only is there that, when you talk about what is really the duty of an independent creator, and for instance, you're yourself in this very position.
Yep.
I am sensitive to the idea that there needs to be a break on the stranglehold of corporate media and how the world has been informed. I think over the last 10 to 15 years, that has very much happened. That is, we are no longer in an era in which the independent media creator is some sort of, in its infancy or embryonic. This is now the state of the world. More people are getting their news from sources like that than they really are from things like cable news. And so to me, I understand that mistakes happen. And if mistakes happen after, say, an independent creator follows basic, ordinary prudence in how they approach their job, then there's no cause of action for defamation there because a mistake can be made without negligence. But when a creator is negligent, when there's affirmative facts in the record that show that they ignored things that were leading them to the truth, where they actively avoided the truth, that's a completely different issue. And that's what we're seeing here. When you look at these depositions, and in fact, you can go by our firm's YouTube channel, you can see the depositions of Steven Crowder, of Univision, of Newsmax, of InfoWars. And you will see that this is not just merely a situation where an explainable mistake occurred. There were several layers of both incompetence and willful indifference to the truth that resulted in this. And when that happens and you're making money off of the information you spread,
Mm.
then yes, when you falsely accuse somebody of the most heinous of crimes, you just simply have to be responsible for that.
Uh, as of now, who has settled and who hasn't settled?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, the settlements that we'll know about are those who were actually in the lawsuit. Now, obviously, as you mentioned, we start a demand process before the lawsuit starts. So this is something, a message to media outlets out there. If you settle with me before I sue you, no one will ever know you were in any trouble. No one will have any idea of what happened because that's all confidential. No one will ever know about it. But after the suit was filed, there were several defendants who did settle. The first one of those is Tim Pool, which he, to his credit, faster than any media defendant in who was sued in the lawsuit, came forward and resolved the case. Steven Crowder also resolved the case following his deposition. He had moved to dismiss the case. We were granted the ability to take his testimony. After that deposition occurred, he made the correct decision and settled the case. We're still, unfortunately, we still have Newsmax and Univision, and of course, Mr. Schroyer at InfoWars has obviously no intention of settling. So we still have, our two biggest corporate media defendants, Newsmax and Univision, who've decided they'd rather force this man to litigate than resolve the case.
So, in reading between the lines, you're saying there are some who settled before even being named in a lawsuit that you are not in a position to name because that was the whole point of settling before the lawsuit.
That is absolutely correct.
All
Yes.
right.
And what's
Um,
interesting is I think most traditional media outlets, that's the way they go. When there is an actual legitimate case and it's not frivolous, most responsible media outlets settle up and take accountability for what they did. Unfortunately, I tend to sue most of the media outlets I sue do not tend to fit that mold.
let's switch gears a little bit and follow up on something from when we last spoke to you. One of the things that has become the subject of much discussion since the verdicts against Alex Jones that you were involved in is manipulations around bankruptcy filings and auctions. And, we don't have to rehash the last period of time about it, but my audience knows that there were clearly moves made to try to avoid having to pay out any money. And when I asked you, what can you ultimately do to collect? You were a little cagey at the time and you said, we have ways to do it. We now have some time that has gone by. Have you found ways to collect from Alex Jones?
Yes, we have. Unfortunately, the bankruptcy was a very long process and not productive in most of the ways that you would want it to be, because you don't have the most cooperative and easy to work with defendant. But that bankruptcy process was very successful at sequestering and holding secure monies that were held by Free Speech System, the parent company of InfoWars. And during that process, the court-appointed trustee has been able to collect quite a large pool of money. That money is going to be liquidated and paid out to the families, and that's a fairly substantial amount of money. Obviously, nowhere close to their verdict size, but there is already that pot of money is already there. There was some. Your viewers may know that the parent company of The Onion has made attempts to purchase the IP of InfoWars and
Yeah.
take over that intellectual property. That deal is still very much in the works. That unfortunately couldn't be worked out in the bankruptcy itself, but that is also still in the cards. And finally, there are Alex Jones's personal assets. And one of the big fights that we had in bankruptcy that we were successful is Alex Jones was found that he could not discharge those debts through bankruptcy. So now we're in a position where we need to physically collect on Alex Jones outside of the bankruptcy system. We've just exited the bankruptcy system now. The Connecticut plaintiffs who filed suit after us, as well as my Texas clients, have all now joined together in a joint collections against Jones. And that's going to be playing out over the next 6 months or so. You may have seen that the Connecticut case, in fact, was recently affirmed by the Connecticut Court of Appeals, and so that judgment is final. And what you're going to be seeing now is the disbursement of the company's money, as well as coming after Jones for whatever we can squeeze out of him personally. It isn't the result that everybody probably wanted when they saw the verdicts, right? But we always took this case with sort of a question mark of whether you'd be able to collect against Jones at all. It's oftentimes very difficult when you have a single individual, just a rich guy, to try to come after his money under lawsuits because they have so many protections and exemptions from being collected. But in
Now, as
this
he
case,
continues to
not the way.
create content and
That's true.
presumably generate revenue, does his ongoing revenue become part of your collection process, or is there sort of a date at which, okay, what he does from this point forward is beyond the reach, or how does that work?
No, everything that he's making for free speech systems right now, that's all fair game. That's all going into the accounts of the business. Now, the moment when it happens, and it will happen at some point, when Jones, free speech system shutters its doors and he tries something new, now we're actually going after Jones's personal income. That can get a little more complicated. But the things that free speech is doing right now, yes, it's that money's there for the plaintiffs. And so at some point, he will make that transition. That's going to happen. We understand that it's not a practical thing to say Alex Jones is never going to be part of public life anymore. Already, he's been significantly defanged. His reach is infinitesimal, is what it was, and he's been broken psychologically. He's not an interesting person to watch anymore. He doesn't have the same cultural influence or anything anymore because he's broken and uninteresting now. But he is still making a marginal amount of money, and that of course is going into the pot as well. But there will come a day in which Jones will probably be trying to make a lot less money and make it in much more secretive ways. And so some of the challenge for us over the coming period is to obviously go find some of that money. But as a result, ultimately, what you can say over the past couple of years now since the verdict is that every attempt that Jones has made to ultimately slide out from this verdict and have no responsibility, those have all failed. And so he's run out of runway. That's just all there is to it now. And so these next 6 months should be a pretty downhill slope into getting this case resolved.
We've been speaking with attorney Mark Bankston, involved in a number of cases really relevant to the independent media space. Mark, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, man. It's been really great being here.